Hello, welcome to Tarot and Attachments. My name is Erin Smith. I am a professional tarot reader and an associate marriage and family therapist. And I like to do these weekly readings to check in and get some insight into things that are going on topically at the moment of these readings. It's actually Saturday, June 7th, when I'm recording this. And I guess what I've been reflecting on in the last several days leading up to this is just I'm really aware of this delicate balance of paying attention to events that are going on in the world that feel particularly catastrophic or threatening. And I think that is, it's fair to say that that is happening, both at the level of our own government in the United States. Uh, just yesterday in Los Angeles, which is where I'm located, there were ICE raids going on throughout the city, and a massive uprising of protest happened in response to that downtown. And the response from federal agents was an intensely militarized attack against people protesting. And, my feeling about that is that I am heartened to see that people are angry and opposed to what's going on. And it is also terrifying. It's terrifying to see that there is action being taken against citizens of the United States that is reminiscent of a fascist state. And, just obviously all the other things that are going on in the world. The, continued rise of AI, which is not only displacing people from their jobs, but it is taking a tremendous toll on the environment, the amount of energy that needs to be produced in order to make this technology viable is completely draining. It is polluting these centers that are generating AI are polluting the groundwater of the cities that they live near. And it's just very clear that things are kind of ramping up in such a way that is volatile and destructive. So this is sort of what's on my mind. I imagine many of you are thinking things that are similar. And so it is easy, reflecting on my own experience in the face of these current events, it is easy to feel overwhelmed and to become despairing in the face of such an overwhelming onslaught of big forces. There's, this sort of sense of like, what can I do individually to stand my ground and really align with others who are reflecting of my own values, this idea that unification, if we stand together, we have a greater chance of opposing some of these fascist movements and, protect the environment, protect our fellow citizens through unified effort. That feels good and right. But how do I not succumb to this sort of feeling of despair or overwhelm or hopelessness? that also comes in the face. Like, how do I continue to show up for my own daily life? And in my case, show up for my clients and, for, show up for our families and our friends and do the day-to-day mundane stuff that we all need to do in order to care for ourselves. Like these feel, it feels like a lot to hold simultaneously at once. And so, again, this is sort of what I've been reflecting on. My question to the cards is really asking for insider guidance about how we can do that skillfully. What do we need to know that maybe we're not seeing? What would be an effective way to show up in the world at this time? How can we continue to take care of ourselves while we fight these bigger fights? So that's my question, and I'm just curious to see what the answer is. So I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to go silent. I'm going to concentrate while I shuffle. With you momentarily. I'm just going to say prayer. Mhm. 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 So it's an interesting answer. I mean, it's bringing up some points that I think are really salient. And, you know, first of all, when I was shuffling, this card jumped. So let's talk about the Five of Swords. The Five of Swords is no ground gained or lost. It's a stalemate. And it just feels like getting stuck in a well-worn neurological groove. It's this kind of like there's no winning, there's no movement, and it is stagnant. In some instances, I equate it to writer's block. It's not being able to see a way out of your situation because of the narrative looping that one can get into. specifically in times that are distressing. Or I would even go a little bit deeper and say that, like, what's coming up here in this poll is that what we are looking at right now, the externalization of violence, hatred, anger, oppression, this that what we're looking at is an externalized presentation of a deeper wound, of a shadow that we have refused to look closely at because it's uncomfortable, it's painful, it requires a meaningful course correction. And I mean, we could think of this like just historically, specifically in the West, that we are seeing the amplification of colonialism that has been going on in human history for a long time. This need to enslave other people, to keep them from realizing their own power, to keep people vulnerable so that they can be exploited, in essence. And this is what we're looking at here. The moon is about things we keep hidden from ourselves, things that are too painful or too uncomfortable to look at in the light of day. And so it gets buried in the unconscious. And so long as we are unwilling to look into the depths of that unconscious material and begin to make sense of it and begin to become aware of how that displaced material is being enacted out in the world on others, so long as we are disowning it, refusing to take responsibility for this level of violence and degradation that we're seeing both environmentally and in society at a social level, that we're just doomed to get stuck in this one way of thinking about things. It's very hard to imagine an alternative when you're still clinging to this idea that capitalism is the only way that we can, live in the world. It's the only economic system that we are willing to choose. And of course, capitalism, it eats its children. It's sort of Saturnian in that way, that it needs to constantly be in a state of expansion, that it needs more and more. It's an insatiable beast that serves a very minute few at the top and enslaves the many. And it destroys the environment, without a doubt. That infinite growth on a finite planet is an impossibility. And again, this is it's deeply embedded in our psychology, and therefore it affects all the systems that we produce, our educational systems, our economic system. This idea that somehow, I mean, how absurd is it that they're passing a bill to give people who couldn't possibly spend the amount of money that they've amassed in 10 lifetimes tax cuts, that as if they needed more help or more assistance. And what is more going to get them anyway? At some point, again, there's an absurdity to this. It's not even about what we're looking at. Like, when is more enough? And it sort of leads you to believe that this isn't really about money or power, because the people who are orchestrating these movements are insatiable. There is never enough. And it is causing this intense collapse. And so what this feeding the beast, what does the beast really want? What is really going on beneath the surface of this grasping and hoarding tendency that we're seeing in society that is at the root of so much destruction? Well, the moon, in my practice, I very much associate with early childhood wounding. And the reason that I do is that at this early stage of development, when humans are developing an attachment to their caregivers, it happens between 6 to 18 months of age. It is a time in our lives when we don't have a narrative conception of ourselves or the world yet. That doesn't happen until we start to speak. So the way that we experience the world, the way that we take in information is totally unconscious. We feel it in our bodies as an emotional sensation. When we are hungry, we don't experience that in terms of thought forms, the way that we might now. I'm hungry, I need some food. It is experienced as a deep distress call, because in fact, these needs that we all have when we are in this stage of infancy are, non-negotiable. If you don't eat, then you die. And what's more is you don't have any way of communicating this to the outside world except through this expression of distress, crying. And if you are a person who, when you cry, when you express this intense threat to your life in the form of a need, in the form of crying to have this need met, if the need is met, then there is an internalized sense of security. I live in a world where my needs are going to be met, and I can trust that when that happens consistently enough, regularly enough, there's an internalized sense of like, there's enough. It's going to be okay. I may have this feeling, this longing that something is missing, but it is satiated. It is addressed. I am attuned to by my caregivers, and they're able to meet this need in a good enough way so that I can feel secure. So if that doesn't happen, there is this hole that gets created in our psyche, in our being, this sensation of longing that is never quelled. And it feels like a threat to our lives, to our sense of self, to our security. And when it's deep enough and dismissed long enough, it often shows up in the world once we grow into, adolescence and adults. It often turns into a kind of addiction. And this is really what we're looking at right now, an addiction to money and power. Similar to an addiction to a substance like heroin or, fentanyl. You have this intense craving. You take the substance. It's fixes you for just a moment, and then the cycle of longing continues. It's never enough. There's never enough to feel satiated. And ultimately, it's killing you. And this is what we're looking at now. Until we address the underlying issue, the wound, the attachment wound, where we feel some sense of security within ourselves, and therefore we can be generous with the people that we share the planet with, right? I don't have to hoard it all for myself because of this insatiable need that is never satisfied. I have enough, and therefore I can share. It cultivates generosity. What all the attachment research shows us is that children who grow up in households of abuse or neglect, they don't share their toys. They don't learn to collaborate with others because they are operating out of this sense, this urgency that there's not enough for me. And again, like we're just seeing these children who've grown into adults and they're acting out this repetitive behavior on the world. It's absurd. Billionaires should be able to share the wealth. And in fact, I'm even going to suggest, by the way, this is not my theory. It's, you could read Machiavelli, that this need to hoard and suppress others to make an entire population in a kind of indentured servitude through debt, that this is cause for concern for the people who are enacting these systems. They always have to look over their shoulder. It creates this greater sense of distress for them internally, because if you're harming others, then you're always worried that they're going to snap and fight back. Whereas if you are living in systems where people's needs are being met, there's less likelihood that why are people going to risk hardship or going to jail when they have plenty? When they can devote time and energy to their friends and family, when they can feed themselves well and put a roof over their head, they have no need to take from you. Crime is more likely to be eradicated when every single person has everything that they need. That what we are seeing, the instability of society, is really the result of this hoarding resources at the top for a very select few people. And again, the cards, and I'm interpreting them as such, are telling us that this is an attachment wound. And that we absolutely should oppose these things that are happening on a material day-to-day level, but we also have to do the work to begin to address, and of course this is a vicious cycle, right? Because here's the other thing, when you're hoarding all the money and resources at the top and taking it out of the public schools and taking it out of healthcare and making healthcare unavailable to people, and not regulating the cost of housing and allowing these private equity firms to come in and buy up all single family homes. When you are creating these systems, then what happens is that people continue to raise traumatized children. Because if you don't have enough time to spend with your kids because you're busy working 3 jobs, or your health is failing and you're going bankrupt, then no one is there to tend to the needs of children, and that is continuing to perpetuate these cycles. And so ultimately, we have to begin to treat the attachment wounding. And this means that, I don't know, in terms of like the recovery model, the 12-step recovery model, we cannot begin to orient ourselves towards a solution until we are willing to identify the problem clearly. The first step is essential to taking any of the rest of the steps. And I'm speaking sort of metaphorically and literally, that we have to identify the real problem. The real problem is that there are sick and wounded people that are running the country and running multiple countries, right? That a fascist dictator is likely a deeply psychologically damaged person. And I think that there's enough evidence to support that. At least, I think we can see that in the leadership of the United States. So this is important to bring this what to see what we're looking at and bring it up into conscious awareness and shine the light of truth on it so that we can begin to orient ourselves towards how to really address these situations, both out there and within ourselves. So, the Buddhist idea of the law of dependent origination, or Indra's net, is that everything is interconnected. And this is another sort of way that we can begin to orient ourselves in these big, seemingly insurmountable, issues that are happening out there, is that when we turn our attention inward, when we're willing to do the healing work within our own lives, it has a ripple effect out there. And it's important to know that, because it can, again, sometimes we can feel separate from things that are going on out in the world. Sometimes we can feel insignificant. Who am I? I'm just one person. But there really is this ripple effect that when I am devoted to my own healing from my own attachment wounding, and I notice how the conditions that I internalized from those, young years in my own life come out in the form of behavioral choices, and that the more that I am able to cultivate, affect tolerance, sit with the big, intense emotions, regulate my central nervous system, learn to self-soothe, I have better control over the way that I express myself. I am more empathetic and attuned to what's going on with other people. I'm less reactionary. When I'm able to do that within myself, then that has a ripple effect out in the world. Because we are at a kind of a crossroads. That's what the cards are saying. The Two of Pentacles is like weighing your options. It is recognizing that we're at this we're at a tipping point. And it is likely going to be, volatile. It's going to be up and down for a while. We are, and each and every moment we're being asked to consider the actions that we take and to be mindful, of it, to cultivate a sense of awareness and self-reflection so that we can choose as wisely as possible. Because again, we're all humans, and you're going to lose your temper, and we're going to be unskillful in the way that we communicate with people. It's just going to happen. But if we are in a practice of mindful reflection, then we're more likely to catch it in the moment. We're more likely to be able to choose the ways in which we wish to show up that would create greater connection and stability rather than undermining it. And so, the Four of Swords is taking respite from the battle of life. It's being in reflective repose. And I very much associate it with a practice of meditation, being still, looking inward, learning to focus our attention, to not get distracted and dysregulated and pulled into a million different directions, but being able to keep our minds focused on an object of intent, and being able to look inward and notice, like, when I have these thoughts, these physical type emotional sensations arise in conjunction with these thoughts. And just noticing how I am in the world. Again, like, oh, right, when I'm dysregulated, I tend to act out in this way. And, that's something that I would like to change. So I'm going to take some different actions in order to address that behavior. And then, and again, to be compassionate with oneself and to recognize that it takes time to shift things internally and externally. Um, so the other thing I think that Spirit is trying to get us to see is that we maybe have more power than we think we do. And to identify and align with our own power, I think is really important at this time. Kings and queens represent mastery, maturity, being in positions of authority or sovereignty over one's own life. And again, I think, we're all at a different level of this, right? Some people have achieved this to the degree that, like, they can leave a job that is toxic. Uh, Others have not, right? But what this is trying to get us to see is that at wherever we are in life, to acknowledge where we have the semblance of choice and where we wish to direct our will. And again, even if this is just at the most basic level of I'm going to be internally reflective, I am going to notice when I am in an intense emotional state, and rather than react, I'm going to choose how I wish to show up to the situation. Um, and it's an interesting thing. Wands are passion, creativity, life force, energy, and they're hot. They're the element of fire, right? And so if you think of this element of fire, a fire can be used to cook your food, to bring warmth to the household. It can sterilize instruments in order to prevent the spread of infection. Like, the element of fire can be a life-giving tool, but it can also decimate your village or your city. Like, again, I live in Los Angeles, and at the beginning of the year, the fires were tremendously destructive. And so if you're thinking of this as an element or an energy that can be harnessed and directed wisely or masterfully, then this is what we're being directed to think about. Like, how can we direct our passion so that it's productive and it is in alignment with the greatest good? And again, it's going to look different for all of us. It may be quite literal. Like, if you're an artist and your creative voice has a powerful way of influencing the vision of others, then you direct your passion towards your work. If you are a person who is experiencing extreme anger, as many of us are, at the way things are going down, it might be showing up to a protest. It might be producing content on your channel. It might be utilizing your voice to help others. Whatever this looks like for you, what it's saying is, how can we be creative in directing our passion in such a way that it starts to have a positive effect in the world? And another big important element here is learning to direct our minds rightly. Again, swords are the suit of thoughts, ideas, communication. And the King of Swords is one who has learned to wield his sword wisely. He does not use his thoughts or his words on himself like a weapon in the form of being hypercritical, hyperjudgmental, lost in minutia or obsession. He stays laser focused on that which he wishes to say or communicate or write or teach. And he is skillful in the way that he wields his words. So there's a power here. There's a power in what we do and what we say that can be used to bring into awareness, into the light of consciousness, that which has been buried in the unconscious, And so long as it remains disowned, we're doomed to repeat it out in the world. We can speak the truth about this. We can create work that brings this up into a state of awareness. And especially if we are being mindful about the way that we produce this work, it has the power to get us unstuck, or at least to see some other alternatives, right? So another piece of this is really about bringing in compassion. I really think that there are few cards in the deck that illuminate this principle better than the Six of Cups. The Six of Cups is like loving before you've ever had your heart broken. It's loving with an unguarded heart. And think of the magnitude of that. Think of what it feels like to be abandoned or humiliated or harmed in some way socially. And to be able to come back from that experience and still love freely. To not shut down or shut people out or vilify all people, but to truly feel the need, the desire, the willingness to connect in this kind of open-hearted exchange. This is really what the Six of Cups is about. That finding this compassion, this empathy, understanding that others are struggling, and really finding it within ourselves, this desire to help. And in doing so, we find this acceptance and connection within ourselves. That there is this, that what is being illuminated here is that when we connect on a heartfelt human level, when we're supporting one another, that this is extremely helpful to our state of being. To feel that we're not alone, to feel this sense of connection is really essential to helping wherever we can to oppose these violent forces that are causing so much destruction. And then this is a big one too. You know, I was in a meditation earlier this week by a wise teacher. And you know, he's Buddhist. He's from the Bon tradition. And you know, what he was saying is that to some degree we have to cultivate a sense of trust. We have to trust in the practice, trust in our teachers, trust in that which we know to be good, and you know, he was saying, you know, trust in the deities, trust in the dakinis, trust in the practice of meditation in order to bring us to liberation. You know, that if we trust in what we know to be good, that things will right themselves, to, you know, and that this trust carries us through. It helps us to show up in good ways and not give in to despair. And this trust that he was speaking of is often referred to in the Christian traditions as faith. We have to have faith. Again, it's easy to look at the conditions of the world and think like, what's the point? It's all going south. What could we possibly do about this? But if we have faith that there is some other way that things can go, and that if we make ourselves available for that insight, that we'll know what to do in times of confusion, that to really trust that there is some kind of goodness, some kind of divine intelligence, that when we make ourselves available, it reveals itself to us. And I mean, that has certainly been true for me. I think that there have been many times in my life where I have felt that I'd hit some kind of bottom, or that I would never come back from some situation or some dis pit of despair, that there was just no way out of it. And that in these moments, I would open myself up and there would be a kind of download, a kind of grace was made available to me where I could see a solution or take an action that ultimately led to a new experience. This has happened, this has been shown to me. And so I believe it to be possible, even in the face of like everything that's going on. There's got to be something more than this. And I don't necessarily know what that is in its totality, but if I remain open, if I trust the process, if I leap, then the net will appear. And that is really what our friend the Fool is trying to orient us towards. He is so connected to spirit. He knows that if he steps off the cliff, he will be carried. And so even the situations in life that look like a pitfall, that looks like a disastrous end, can in fact lead us on a new path and open us up to a new way of experiencing the world and one another that is guided by this sweet, open-hearted empathy. And even just meditating on this energy of collaboration, love, kindness, seeing in one another the beauty of being humans and connecting to our collective humanity. If I meditate on that energy, it's like I'm more likely to find those resources out in the world that are vibrating at that similar frequency. So I don't know. I hope that something here was helpful. I know I kind of, well, it's hard to talk about things that might be meaningful to people without bringing politics into it at this point in time, because that is what's up. That's what's up in the ether. So I hope this was helpful, and I want to express my heartfelt love for all of you, for anyone who's listening, for anyone who needs love, comfort, and soothing. May you be safe and protected. May you be happy and peaceful. May you be healthy and strong. May you have ease of well-being and acceptance of all life's conditions. Many blessings.